Right, gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Wing Commander Unni Krishna Pillai, who is the Chief Rotary Wing Test Pilot at HAL Bangalore. Wing Commander Pillai is a graduate of the National Defence Academy and was commissioned in the Indian Air Force in 1984. He was trained on helicopters and has flown more than 6,800 hours on 25 different types of aircraft till date. A large share of his operational flying has been on Mi-8 and Mi-17 helicopters and has flown in all operational areas in India. He is a qualified flying instructor with over 1,000 hours on the HPT-32 basic trainer. He graduated from the experimental flight test course held at the Air Force Test Pilot School at AST in 1993-94. Here I must mention that I was the commandant of AST at that time, and it gives me great pleasure to see one of the students of that course reach this height of eminence. Congratulations, Unni.
Thank you, sir.
After graduating from the Test Pilot School, he has been actively involved in flight testing of the Advanced Light Helicopter and has more than 2,800 hours on various types of the Dhruv. He has also been involved in testing of various systems for both the Air Force and for HAL. He joined HAL after release from service in February 2003. He has displayed the Dhruv in air shows, international air shows in France, UK, Turkey, Chile, Malaysia, and of course at Aero India. On 1st February 2009, he took over as the Chief Test Pilot Rotary Wing of HAL. He is also did the first flight of the indigenously developed and built light combat helicopter on 29th March 2010. That is a great milestone for any test pilot to do the first flight. He is now actively involved in testing and certification of numerous systems for the Dhruv and Rudra, the weapons system integrated ALH. Over to you, Unni.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, I was given half an hour to cover the lessons learned in the development of Dhruv. Now, the topic is so large, it can take months for me to compile and days to cover in front of you. So what I have here essentially done is, honestly, I have pulled out what are the larger aspects of our lessons learned and try to bring it up here for our learning. I'll start with introduction to the program. Then we'll be going over the air and naval staff requirements, the history of development, issues with the design consultant whom we had, challenges with design, new design concepts which were tried on the Dhruv, and challenges in the transition to production as we move from prototype to production, the large number of modifications which we had incorporated in the LSPs. I'll briefly touch over the issues of time and cost. And finally, have we applied the lessons which we have learned? Now, to recap in history, India always had a requirement for a helicopter to operate at very high altitude in the Himalayas. Since none of the helicopters were capable, Aerospatiale was hired by the government of India to design. And the Lama/Cheetah was the resulting design. Now, the Cheetah is an excellent design. Okay, however, but it did not meet our specific requirements of carrying 200 kg at 20,000 feet in OG configuration at ISA plus 20. Now, as usual, something is not working, so I'll just exit and play for you.
Was originally designed for the Indian Air Force to It is the Lama. Of course, it's the highest flying helicopter ever.
In 1972, the aircraft actually flew to an altitude of 41,000 feet.
The Llama was originally designed for the Indian Air Force to defend their high-altitude borders in the Himalayan mountains.
The Llama is amazing because it does many things that the ordinary helicopter cannot do. Most helicopters operate efficiently up to around 8,000 to 10,000 feet, in other words, fairly close to the ground. The Llama, however, can operate very efficiently in the 20,000 feet altitudes.
To operate at such high altitude, the Llama had to overcome the laws of physics.
The problem with flying at altitude is a lack of oxygen molecules in any given square foot of airspace. The higher you go, basically the thinner the air gets, and there's really less and less for the rotor blades to bite into, less air for the engine to breathe.
Okay, now getting back to the presentation, we'll start with the first issues which we had was with the ASR, the requirements that is generated by the air staff requirements or from the naval or from the general staff requirements. So if I remember right, you were in the ASR. Now the ASR and the NSR were released in 79 and had a very ambitious requirement of using a common base platform for performing a sweeping range of roles. One of the roles which was given was to take off from 20,000 feet in out of ground effect configuration at ISA plus 20 degrees with a payload of 200 kg and a large fuel load of over 2 hours endurance. Realistically looking, there is no helipad in the country at 20,000 feet from where you could launch such an operation. Now the ASR also called for stringent agility requirements of up to 3.5 G, the highest seen on any rotary wing platform. The armed roles included carriage of weapons, sensors like 20 mm gun, cannon, anti-armor missiles, air-to-air missiles, EW, MAWS, and advanced sighting systems. Now the naval roles included search and rescue, troop carriage, anti-submarine warfare, anti-ship, anti-surface vessels, and the weapons included torpedoes, exocet, depth charges, sensors included dipping sonar, surveillance radar, sonobuoys, and the magnetic anomaly detector. Now the naval requirements were too large for a 5.5 ton platform. While we agree that extreme excellence at certain specific points is justified, however, serious problems creep in when the requirements are at too many points and are also beyond the range of contemporary technology on a single platform. The IAF and the Navy issued separate ASRs, even when the base platform was common. When seen together, some of the requirements were clearly contradictory and beyond the reach of a beyond the reach of existing technology for a single platform. Now, just to, in blade design, high speed and good hover are at either end of the spectrum. If you want an aircraft, a helicopter to clip at 280 kilometers, you cannot expect it to hover at 20,000 feet in out of ground effect, in ISA plus 20, okay, and carry a huge payload. Now, there were many such requirements which were at the opposing ends from the technological point of view. Now, coming to the first lesson is that spectrum sweeping performance and role requirements demanded of a single platform caused severe hurdles to practical implementation. Users should avoid making requirements by listing the best points seen on different platforms. And the requirements need to be made in consultation with local industry / design houses, keeping in mind the contemporary technology. Now we go on to the next issue which we had was ours was the first time project Dhruv and the number of new concepts which we tried on Dhruv. Just to go briefly into the history so that you can understand better. Now the Government of India had set up a negotiation committee for a collaboration to develop a helicopter. Germany's MBB was contracted in 1984 as a design consultant for a period of 10 years. At that time, there were several budding technological options in rotor blades, gearboxes, vibration control that promised a very large jump in performance. The negotiations committee approved certain design options recommended by MBB to achieve the specified benchmarks. Now, the design concept selected were very innovative concepts. Things like, integrated dynamic system, where the main rotor pitch control rods were routed inside the main rotor shaft. The heart of the helicopter, which is the main gearbox, was a radical design with large area contact gears, which is cutting edge technology even you see in today's context. A hingeless main rotor system consisting of very few parts with a composite hub and a titanium centerpiece. 3-axis vibration system called ARIS to isolate the vibrations of the MGB. And a very lightweight yet powerful 4-bladed stiff and plain rotor that comprises of 2 composite blades bolted together at the center. Now each system appeared to be a way forward to meet the challenging requirements given by the Air Force and the Navy at that time. And it promised maneuverability, reduced basic weight, high altitude performance and ballistic tolerance. However, implementing these concepts was a big challenge. Now just to show you what you see on the left here is the ARIS. It all started with a metallic spring. The first flight on the metallic spring lasted 20 minutes. It failed in 20 minutes. The improved spring lasted maybe another 45 minutes. Thereafter, composite springs were tried, and these springs only caught up when the first production LSPs were coming out. This is the gearbox. The design is amazing in my opinion, but to get it to where it is today was a big uphill task. The blades, the tail rotor is a beautiful concept. So now we come to the lessons. Whatever the reasons or configurations opted for, the fact remained that for a first-time project, there were too many new concepts being tried out here. Sometimes it also appears that MBB had either overestimated their capabilities or perhaps even attempted to experiment the feasibility of some of these concepts at our cost. Now we come to the next issue, which is the premature exit of the consultant. In 95, MBB's involvement in design ceased as their contract had expired. Now, the forces which were at play there refused to extend the contract. The flights of the first prototype at that time were well underway, and all the design-related issues were showing up. Repeated and early failures of critical components like MGB and ARIS, increase in basic weight, etc. had clearly manifested during this period. The departure of MBB resulted in a number of design issues of complicated systems suddenly being tackled solely by HAL designers. Now, since our designers did not have the adequate experience or previous experience to fall back on, it resulted in a very iterative kind of approach where a number of alternatives were tried out, which led to repeated test flights and contributing to large delays. Now the next lesson which we come to is, if we have a consultant, the consultant needs to be held accountable till the design is proven and the helicopter/aircraft enters production and matures. Now, here is to counter Commander Kumar's allegation that we ran back to Bangalore. Here is this shot, including some fingernails approaching our Bangalore. Taken during the flight test. Okay, this slide summarizes our large effort at meeting the very stringent ASR. Here is a photograph of a Mark III somewhere in 2009 landing at a helipad called Sonam, which is at 19,500 feet. When the temperature was ISA plus 20, the payload was in excess of 640 kgs. We never had any issues with stability, control margins, or power. And no helicopter in the world can meet these requirements, which I am very sure. Thank you. This is just a clipping of the testing which we have done on the armed variant. So that I can take a small break. These are all standalone firing, not integrated with the helmet pointing system or any other system. This is to check the basic installation. Subsequently, you will see shot where the complete system has been integrated. This is a Mistral which was fired.
4, 3, 2, 1, now.
Now this is a shot which is taken from the electro-optical pod. You will be able to see below, the gun is to the right and pointing below. That means the electro-optical pod is looking to the right. And this from about 700 meters. This is the electro-optical and the gun are pointing left and below. This is the rockets being fired through the IDS and still HDS through the electro-optical. Actually a Belgian rocket, FZ, and it's able to straddle the target at 8 kilometers quite well. Okay, now we return back to one of the lessons was when we transited from the prototype to the production, there were a lot of issues which reared their head. First of all, it was the first time for both RWRDC and the helicopter division. The pitfalls in transition were unknown. And I feel the presence of MBB at that time would have helped in a much smoother transition to production. On top of that, we made a large number of changes in the first LSPs vis-a-vis the prototypes. These changes caused issues with vibrations, handling and reliability. These are some of the problems we had: roll jerks, AFC related problem, hydraulic system failures, rainproofing. While on ground, it is nicely sealed, but when you get airborne, due to flexure, so the rainwater used to start entering the cabin. TDS failures, vertical oscillation and pedal buzz. Now, why did these things happen? There are a lot of changes which we brought, like I told you. One was a reduction to the weight recommendations of the weight reduction committee were incorporated on the LSPs. Now this brought in a lot of changes, a lot of weight was reduced all over the aircraft, which created a lot of problems. The ARIS, like I told you before, was still evolving while the helicopter was entering production. The exhaust orientation, most of the flying was done with the exhaust oriented in a certain way. However, we had an issue with vertical oscillations, so in a desperate attempt to get rid of the problem, we had to change the orientation of the exhaust. Tail rotor pitch link was changed from 10 to 8 in a weight reduction effort. However, we had to get back to 10. A lot of cowlings and platforms were modified. Now, this is the lesson that the production helicopter need to be of the same SOP as the last prototype tested. Coming to the last lesson. Now, remember, like I told you in the beginning, from the smallest of the bolts to or fasteners to the largest LRU, like the engine or the blade, each has a very long history behind it. Now, if you do not document the process, we will eventually lose the knowledge. And we were slightly late in commencing our documentation, which we have corrected now. But the need to document is vital. Now, I'll just take we have always been accused of time and cost overruns. Now, just to get an idea of the time and cost overruns, the Dhruv utility and the Dhruv WSI combined were developed under 1200 crores. Okay, and the LCH is 376, and we have asked for additional 500 crores, where the cost of Indica, which is at the same time, falls in the same time, was 1750 crores. So I don't think that is correct. Now let us go on to the time. So what we did is we collected data of contemporary helicopters being developed during that period. Now of all the helicopters, if you see from the, say, go ahead to the delivery, they all fall into 14 to 16 year is the time to develop a helicopter. That doesn't change. So we are at 15, which is well within the global average. Now, coming to applying the lessons learned. Have we applied the lessons learned in the projects which we are undertaking now? The answer is yes. And I'm glad to say that in the LCH, starting from the drafting of the requirements, what we learned previously have been applied. Our approach to flight testing has been such that we decided to first freeze the external configuration so that even at the extent of keeping the prototype on ground for a long period of time, such that we are able to run through the test in a comprehensive way and faster. And lastly, controlling the changes in LSP. We started off with TD1. There were issues with TD1. There are a number of changes we wanted. So the design process had started. Each change requires about minimum of 8 months for it to find its place in the helicopter. So here's a picture of the TD2. Now from TD1 to TD2, there are a number of changes, including the wing, and there are a lot of other changes. The cockpit entry exit, a whole lot of changes were made. Aim is to finally reach a configuration, and that would be the final production variant with absolutely no changes between the TD3, which is coming up end of this year hopefully, and the LSPs. With that, I have come to an end. Let's hope this plays. No. I'm open to questions.
Any questions for Wing Commander Pillai?
Just to
The surrounds will stop the LCH into its initial maneuvers and thereafter break off. That is There you go. Don't you see? The patency and agility of the LCH is on clear display here. See the sharp change in direction? And now you will notice the rapid pull-up and unique availability of the rotor as the pilot is punting the... He's now diving sharply, gathering momentum.
You are all welcome to see it performing in the air show starting from day after tomorrow.
Now demonstrates the strong minimum radius still on the side. And this is not possible in the conventional helicopter. Now we're to a tail-up maneuver. This also is not possible in a conventional helicopter.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, any questions for Wing Commander Pillai?
Yeah.
A very impressive display by LCH and the lessons learned. I fully agree with you. But I just have a question for you. Didn't we almost repeat the first lesson learned when we were looking at the next joint multi-role helicopter? We almost tried to put all the eggs in one basket and try to make another helicopter which meets the diverse requirements of all three services. And is it pure coincidence that the Navy decided to go its own way? Were we almost headed down the same direction of going from sea level to 6 kilometers?
See, again, in that situation, one of the lessons learned was the design house needs to be consulted, or the requirements need to be made together with the design house. That did not happen when the requirements were made. They were made individually by the Navy, and but the Air Force did consult us, and the Army did consult us.
So my point is, the lessons learned are on both sides, HAL as well as the individual services. In the case of the joint multi-role helicopter or the Indian multi-role helicopter, all the three services again got together and again made a single set of QRs, and we passed it on to HAL. Thereafter we did do an analysis, and in our wisdom, in the joint wisdom, we decided to keep Air Force and the Army together because their operational envelope is more or less the same, and keep the Navy out on its own,
But
personal
there were a lot of contradictions given the existing technology. Okay, like Navy restricted it, all of it, to 10 tons or 11 tons, 12 tons, sorry. Whereas the Army and the Navy agreed for going up to 14 tons. So now, and given all the requirements which were supposed to meet, the weight was going to 14 tons. So these blocks could have been avoided if maybe from the beginning we were also kept in the picture. Because a lot of work had already, been done by us to, understand what the requirements are.
Right, gentlemen. We'll stop the questions there, but I have two questions for Unni. Do you have a rear view mirror in the cockpit? Because
Yes.
I saw you flying backwards. So,
Yes.
just to clarify 2 points. First is regarding the requirements, conflicting requirements raised by the ASR. Though I was director of ASR, that was about 20 years after the requirements were made, so I had nothing to do with that. And secondly, the problem of telling MBB to go home early, much too early in the program, was a very contentious decision taken by the powers that be at that time. But one of the reasons, main reasons for that was the severe economic crisis that we were faced with in the country in the early 90s. If you remember, we were pawning our gold to the Bank of England to pay off our debts. So that was one of the reasons perhaps which weighed on the decision makers So in retrospect, we cannot quite criticize them for doing what they did. So we've had three extremely fascinating talks.